he's not going to put troops on the ground. So he wants to bomb the country into regime change. And we know how that has worked out elsewhere. The American record in trying to foster changes of government in the Middle East is appalling.
Now, protests are continuing to take place in Iran over the country's economic crisis, even in some of the most conservative areas, such as Mashhad, against the regime in what's being seen as the most dangerous uprising since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. The demonstrators began after the US-based human rights activist news agency reported that 65 people have now been killed, with thousands arrested. And indeed, the headline in the New York Times this morning is "Trump is briefed on options for striking Iran as the protests continue." He said he will act in support. Meanwhile, the E3, the European three leaders, Germany, France and the UK, are urging the Iranian authorities to exercise restraint, to refrain from violence and to uphold the fundamental rights of Iran's citizens. Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei has accused those protesting of trying to please Donald Trump. And as you heard, protesters are now being threatened with the death penalty. Well, let's bring in Sir Richard Dalton, who was the British ambassador to Tehran from 2003 to 2006. Hello to you.
Good morning.
I know it's difficult because of an internet blackout and elsewhere. What is your assessment of the current situation in Iran with these protests?
That it's very serious, that it parallels previous outbreaks against the regime, but that this time, not only are there economic grievances and specific grievances, but there is a determination amongst those out in the streets to replace the regime with something better, to get the freedom that they have wanted for so long and which has been repressed for so long. But we don't know, frankly, how serious it is. I can see three ways in which it could develop. First, it could fizzle out under the weight of the repression, and that has happened in previous rounds. Secondly, it could go on for some weeks, and it could eventually lead to defections from the security forces. There's often in these situations a moment, a breaking point, where the rank and file in the streets are no longer willing to fire on their fellow citizens. And thirdly, there could be some external intervention. There could even be an atrocity inside Iran which changes the picture. An external intervention, we don't know what form it might take. It could lead to the hastening of some form of negotiation, but we can discuss that separately. At the moment, all one can say is that as a consequence of external intervention, there could be either prolonged chaos or civil war at one end of the spectrum, or at the other, some form of eventual resolution.
We do know that protesters are now being killed by the security forces, do we not?
Yes, indeed. And we must remember, too, that the British government and others are calling for peaceful protest, and a lot of the protest has not been peaceful. Any country in the world is going to draw that distinction. We do ourselves, and if government buildings are torched, if fires are raised, if the security forces in the streets' lives are threatened, as they are in Iran, there's going to be violence on both sides. And there are at least 12 deaths on the security forces' side. So this is not a situation that can be characterized as a bunch of villainous security forces opposed to large crowds of purely peaceful demonstrators.
Donald Trump has said that if Iranian leaders give orders, and that leads to the killing of protesters, that he will, quote, be hitting them very hard. What do you see as his likely options for an intervention on the side of the protesters?
Well, there's two things to say about that. The first is that he's not going to put troops on the ground. So he wants to bomb the country into regime change. And we know how that has worked out elsewhere. The American record in trying to foster changes of government in the Middle East is appalling. The war on terror and the interventions in Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Gaza, Libya, Iraq have led to hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties. And we know from the failures of the Arab Spring democratic revolutions how difficult these situations can be. So absolutely no plan has emerged from this warlike talk by President Trump.
I mean, it's not possible that he could try and do a Maduro and send in an extraction force or something like that.
Well, the last time the Americans tried that was in 1980 when they sent a helicopter-borne and a Hercules aircraft-borne force to extract their hostages. It was a total disaster. Now, of course, they've learned a great deal since then, and American special forces coordinate different arms infinitely better. But that exercise illustrates the difficulty of extracting a leadership from hundreds and hundreds of kilometers inland, from within a capital city of 20 to 30, capital conurbation of 20 to 30 million people. This is not a Caracas, which is 10 kilometers from the sea and able to be dominated by 1/3 of the American Navy. The disparity of forces between an American insertion force and the Iranian forces on the ground would be immense. Now, maybe they could do it. Intelligence of Iran, the movements of its leaders and so on has clearly improved immensely since I was in Tehran. So nothing should be ruled out at this stage, but frankly, I don't see it working well. It wouldn't remove the Islamic regime. After all, the intervention in Caracas has not removed the Chavista regime. So you could end up with different bunch of leaders doing more or less the same things in order to protect their lives, their interests, and those of the 10 to 15% of the population of Iran who do support the regime actively and Islamic rule.
If the regime were to collapse, and I appreciate you're not predicting that, but if it were to collapse, what do you think would most likely follow? And I say that bearing in mind because some people are suggesting that the difference this time is that all the groups of protest, the different groups of protest, seem to be uniting around the Shah's descendant, Mr. Pahlavi.
It's far too soon to say that they're uniting. Attempts to unite them overseas, in America particularly, including Pahlavi, have signally failed. He's seen as somebody out of touch, an American. He's seen as somebody who represents a former way of ruling Iran, which was incredibly unsatisfactory. He says he just wants to hold the ring, but holding the ring while others fight the political battles presupposes that there are organized political forces to do that political debate to achieve a consensus across this country of 85 million people. Now, there's no sign of that building up. Yes, his is the name that is being shouted in the streets, and analysts much closer to the situation than I say that is partly born of desperation, that when looking forwards is so difficult, some people are looking backwards. But a great deal of serious political discussion and development has to take place before he could somehow be inserted as the new ruler of the country who could attract the support of the hundreds of thousands of armed men who currently see the Ayatollah as the person they should answer to.
So, Richard Dalton, thank you very much indeed for your analysis.